This video may be perhaps the longest one I've made as of yet, combining various alternative history projects I've made into one. From Kral Isaiah Yasha to Albtraum der Republikaner to the world of Tethys to my collaboration with Micah History revolving around the Cold War. What is this project, you may ask? And for me to answer, I must first dedicate the video to the channel of Micah History itself. We have worked on various collaborations, and in this video, I seek to combine the alternate histories we've made into a single united framework, all tied together through a narrative I have once sought to produce, but now have a solid direction with. Like my radio show related to the Federal Republic of Ethiopiana, this video shall focus on narrative instead of pictures, and in addition, note that narrative depth plays a stronger role than historical plausibility. As always, I hope you will enjoy this long video and participate in the comment section, for only comments promoting blasphemy against the Lord shall be taken down. In the name of God, he who is beyond all, let us get on with this epic. Shall we start? For that, we must go to the beginning of the Ottoman Empire, centuries before the Armenian genocide, long before the Battle of Lepanto, years before the near conquest of Vienna, and almost 100 years before the annexation of Constantinople itself. The Ottomans, if you can call them that, are far less than an empire, but instead a mere sultanate ruling over Christian lands. They have not the means to enslave Christians yet, but their wrath is the same as Mehmet the Conqueror. However, in this history, things are different, and a mere secession crisis to its far-flung throne shall boil into this grand epic. The Ottoman Sultanate is in the midst of a civil war between two men, Turan and Mehmet, who both claim the throne of this isolated corner of the world, each with their own ideals of the nation's future. Turan is a pragmatist at heart, believing strongly in the nation's capabilities for trade and diplomacy, and its ultimate belonging to the people. He is not a bad man by any means, but his commitment to anything greater than the physical world is utterly lacking. Meanwhile, Mehmet is the exact opposite. He is a man of honor, of Islam, but more importantly than his religion, of God. Indeed, he is religious, but his faith in Allah far exceeds any shirk taught to him by those religious texts that were created by men. In short, a victory of Turan shall maintain the Ottoman Empire, while a victory of Mehmet shall maintain its soul. The final battle was set on the hill of Water's Edge, near the glistening lights of Constantinople itself. The Byzantine Empire and Catholic Church, of course, sent spectators to watch the fight, though even they could not predict the ultimate result of the battle. The forces of Mehmet were brave, true, and powerful, paragons of absolute virtue. But even the holiest knight couldn't match the power of Turan's professional army. Mehmet and his brave martyrs made the battle last for 40 days and 40 nights. But when the flood of passion subsided, they were found defeated. Turan proclaimed victory and was given the crown, while Mehmet was sent into the shame of exile, doomed to live the rest of his life under the suzerainty of Byzantium. When the Byzantines received him, he was treated with great respect. Mehmet traveled the lands of Byzantium, carrying with him the greatest of his armies. There he visited grand sites within the glorious, albeit ruined, city of Constantinople, was paraded around by men of the Catholic Church and Byzantium's most elite in the Varangian Guard. They took him to the Byzantine Emperor Alexios, who stood by with a resolute gaze and solemnity in his voice. Upon traveling to the austere throne of the emperor, Mehmet heard many words of respect, in his own native language nonetheless. However, he had no knowledge that this respect was a test. 1 week after his arrival to Constantinople, the emperor requested him of one simple thing.
Ohrads, kvein haironten jutjara, as losener schlechtjast shing fest. Ishwan strong ishiven en ferot voshant your lands heads, vai lesu kadziao vai das takiao thronga ukwanst sultans tiatvaion yarsti brevs tiatjarst. Shing kun zonuzen fol. Zonuzen vashve. Ast veu de ven unanar. Vai de ven unanar narles in wollen once so krafesh. Kardash rad, grenziar stenwolish. Flash voschenar jetanar i foshanar. Heft fenun tosher oniriars. Vai dashin torekti. Sane dashin torekti. Saraj prot conclusio venum želkoš, nerven ver. Von želkoš. Prez. Shamshukas kion ishwan zarka. Heft sprecht vai konst hertog. Christos. Venu quan zonari konik. Uquan stinders das nonst. Quol ran rohanath chon jofeta. One gel kozen berjar stanchven vash. Kansk nonst veni kuquanst in feroters tiat secure. One gel koj verjar stanchven islan nods jergelen heft zonstiat. Sharfol zonstiat haironten shingai. Heft vaish one zavottiu folstiat jarales. Shar lernath les had near. Uquan stands diadven chenion char sot kanzin onjven fol stiat seluken. Ven jutjarar sprash tvori veki vai chrosa tvol vigi gel koji argel liki. Ohrads uquanst verdoki I hosten ven vistujurst. Heft Shamshu kadziao shing sprecht uquanst jan renstiat das trona. Uquanst flash ven jalen sancti I ajor te onch halli zoneri jivai schwanst. Lestas sitias ven uquanst heftan shad rashon frishenda shordas salven jarai shish un ronten fire ran.
That, of course, is the official story of the time, but there's something the records do not tell. Emperor Alexios was wiser than Mehmet thought. Rather than dismissing him completely, Alexios led Mehmet to an ancient cavern underneath the city, one where he could consider embarking on a new path. Within this cave, there was an ancient library that spoke of a hidden set of continents on the opposite end of the world. The many books within this library not only taught him of their existence, but means to reach them. There, Mehmet thought with his advisors on what to do, but eventually came to a conclusion. While Mehmet did not care for power, he was the rightful sultan, and the weight of the crown he does not wear is still heavy upon him. That is why he and his followers built a massive yet undetectable armada, one to march out to a new world. In his voyage, he came across the last men of Al Andalus, fleeing the swords brought upon them by the Spanish Empire. Gathering his new men undetected, he was soon brought to the New World, but there he faced yet another dilemma. Where shall he and his men travel to? That decision brought conflict worse than anyone could imagine, but an answer was given. The Granadans traveled south to modern-day Central America, establishing a nation connected to both the Pacific and Atlantic. Mehmet and his men landed in modern-day Georgia, establishing the Sultanate of Yenistan as a beacon of Islam and evangelizing it to the rest of the world. As contact between the two nations was cut, the Granadans focused on their own prosperity only for a limited period of time before the call of Dawah grew further and further. The land they entered was uniquely bleak, and a few explorers declared that it is worse than Jahannam itself. This was the crucible that forged the people of New Granada as they established their dominance throughout Central America. Soon as prosperity grew, those within New Granada wished to expand their territory and their faith. This led to contact with the Mexica people, also known as the Aztecs. Initial meetings between Islamic scholars and Aztec lords were short and simple. The Islamic scholars were captured by the barbaric jaguar warriors sent to Tenochtitlan and sacrificed alongside the intense heat of the jungles. Initially, a few of the people surrounding the Aztecs considered the warm embrace of Muhammad, but upon a devastating smallpox epidemic, the Aztecs did indeed fully convert. However, they did not convert to the Mohammedanism followed in Granada, but something much darker. Ahmad the Great, an Islamist with beliefs that could horrify even those of ISIS today, translated the Quran to Nahuatl, but corrupted its teachings. It was this corruption, not genuine Islam, that spread within the Aztec Empire, and the emperor himself, Totecatl al-Moctezuma, insisted on the conversion of his people. While he tolerated remaining Aztec pagans for a period of 5 years, upon May 19th, 1400, all pagans within the Aztec Empire were beheaded. Aztec wars of dominance corrupted the lands of modern-day Mexico for the entirety of the 1400s, witnessing the death of thousands or perhaps hundreds of thousands within a single month. But not all dark days last forever. With a fleet of heroic men beside him, Christopher Columbus, the discoverer of the New World and annihilator of pagans, expanded the reach of the Spanish Empire to the Caribbean, soon finding the state of New Granada and the ever-expanding Aztec horde. However, the fight was a bit more complex than the Spanish initially thought. The Aztecs and Granadans, initially thought of just as Moors by ignorant Spaniards who did not know the full extent of Aztec horrors, were soon known to be at war. Knowing the threat that the Aztecs would soon prove to any further act of colonization, Queen Isabella herself met with the Sultan of New Granada to negotiate the end of their wrath. This was the longest wait one could know as the Spanish consolidated their claims in the Caribbean, waiting for their land to be strong enough to beat the Aztecs in one fell swoop. In 1511, the Spaniards conquered the Isle of Hispaniola and began an assault against the Aztecs, led by the noble commander Hernan Cortes. The conquistadors marched heroically, traveling deep into the Mexican jungles, assembling an army of natives and reaching the glorious city of Almarcaz. once known as Tenochtitlan. Cortes and his loyal troops marched to the Grand Mosque, but were pelted by not only the professional soldiers of the Aztec Empire, but by guerrillas and local citizens. When Hernan Cortes finally managed to go to the top of the mosque, he was slaughtered by Moctezuma, then a self proclaimed caliph who shouted Muhammad Akbar to the peoples of Al-Markaz. The Eden thought the battle won, but the war was far from over. On the Spanish loss of the battle, the Aztecs truly showed their lack of humanity to the world. Cities were razed, thousands were slaughtered, and the Aztecs developed new ways of human cruelty. Their captives were force fed hallucinogens of potent quality and told to enjoy a wonderful meal, only to realize that they were eating themselves as the pain killing effects of the hallucinogen wore off. Outraged, the Pope declared a crusade against the Aztecs while funding the creation of several Jesuit missions to teach them the virtues of Christianity. Even some within the Aztec Empire accepted Jesus, realizing that anger, violence, and control are not the only solutions and that there are indeed better paths for the future. Soon the Spaniards needed not only the cross to take up, but guns alongside their Christian symbolism. A team of German adventurers under the command of Spanish nobleman Francisco Pizarro took up their guns against the Aztecs, and they were ready for everything. Negotiating with various native tribes, the army of 50,000 German mercenaries and Spanish conquistadores grew thrice as big. After decades of warfare, the crusade ended in a Spanish victory, with most of the caliphate conquered, but the Aztec homeland remained independent. Most of the Aztecs converted to Christianity within the following decades, but they still kept the warrior spirit from their Islamic and pagan past. Emperor Moctezuma was crucified by an angry mob of Christians marching with righteous indignation. While some say that he got baptized in the church before his death, that is a story from later liberals who wish to change history to fit their satanic agenda. Regardless, the German mercenaries within Mexico established the kingdom of Klein Venedig, with Pizarro at the helm. This nation, while nominally a vassal of the Spanish Empire, was independent in all factors except heavy taxes from the nation's vast iron, steel, and gold reserves, as the kingdom had to maintain Spanish sovereignty throughout. On orders from King Pizarro I, the nation expanded northward, first conquering the Apache and Sonora lands and then establishing powerful colonies in the north. This led to a massive debacle within Klein Venedig between the Californians in the north and the Mexicans in the south. A split as ethnic, cultural, lingual, religious, and ideological as it was political, keeping Klein Venedig a vassal state of the Spanish Empire far into the future. In Europe, the world went along a completely different course. The victory of Turan in the Civil War led to the growth of the Ottoman Sultanate. But as he sought to gain good diplomatic relations with Byzantium, he made an unprecedented decision. Disguising this as a spiritual reawakening, Turan secured his dominance over Greece by converting to Catholicism and gaining many powerful allies among knightly orders. Throughout the end of the 1300s, the Ottoman Empire became the sole ruler of Greece, bringing Constantine into its fold, and by 1453, with the aid of the Catholic Church, the city of Istanbul was conquered from Orthodoxy, and Hagia Sophia became a Catholic cathedral. However, Turkey's conversion to Catholicism wasn't the only defining feature of the conflict. Throughout the 1400s, leaders of the new christened Ottoman Empire have worked in shady dealings with malicious organizations spearheaded by the Knights Templar. as Ottoman sultans under Mehmet's tutelage prioritized physical growth and power over spiritual well-being. Dealings with the Templar looked perfect from a pragmatic perspective. After all, many within the upper echelons of Ottoman leadership didn't even believe in God, taking their full conversion to Catholicism as a gamble for the prosperity of their nations instead of a pursuit for objective truth. However, they did not know that by engaging with hidden mystics in the Knights Templar, they would sell the soul not only of themselves, but of the Turkish nation. Soon, no more poems were recited by mystics in the mountains of Anatolia, as they were forced to become administrative bureaucrats. The marches of the Turkish army, once hailed throughout Europe as examples of classical tradition, grew repetitive and boring, eventually becoming eerie chants of loyalty to what could have been the greatest empire in the world. Even the Cathedral of Hagia Sophia, once the splendor of the continent, was transformed into a prison for those who owed too much money to the state. A solid penitentiary for anyone who dared criticize Ottoman leadership. Even religion, as controlling as it is, transformed from the beauty of the Latin Mass to a new, all-standard Turkish Mass, somehow with the Pope's approval. No one questioned this transition, as questioning such changes requires a soul. However, what one could not question was the widespread use of slavery within the Ottoman Empire and its brutal practices throughout the Christian world. This call led to the start of outcries from the world, but no one could reach this outcry greater than the new Pope, Jesus I, also known as Martin Luther. Upon a firm and thorough investigation of all nations within the Church, Pope Jesus soon noticed severe acts of infiltration within the empire, and under his command several papal legates were sent to the state. After a long investigation of Ottoman lands, shady dealings were brought to him, but right before they could be delivered, Pope Jesus mysteriously died. His successor, Pope Leo X, halted the investigations and worked to keep the Ottoman Empire loyal to the dominion of Catholicism. But there was something deeply wrong about the way he went about it. A week after the investigation was halted, several large plaques containing 95 theses were sent to various cathedrals, churches, and the palaces of monarchs. These contained a list of 95 objections to the church, making a point out of the large corruption within the Ottoman Empire is to make papal legates completely disappear. Unlike Pope Jesus' investigations into the Catholic Church, the source of these documents was found rapidly, and the man was revealed to be none other than Martin Luther, the previous pope. The church wanted to silence him, but as they could not reveal his true name, they were prepared to throw him into the fire and punish his declaration of war against the church. This began the Protestant Reformation, spreading wildfires throughout all of Northern Europe. First, the Scandinavian countries converted. Then various German states converted. Through this, new wars began and Christendom erupted into total and complete chaos throughout the century, as there soon became only one saving grace for the continent. This saving grace was the art of colonialism, as the European expansion into North and South America led to the establishment of new states. German and Scandinavian missionaries traveled to the lands of Klein Venedig. The Spanish tried colonialism a second time in the lands of Rio de la Plata, and the English first set up the 13 colonies in North America, first interacting with the lands of Yenistan, established by Mehmet long ago. By then, Yenistan was a fairly prosperous nation controlling much of what is today the state of Georgia. However, their prosperity was gotten off of ill gains. While Mehmet remained the Sultan, much of his actual political power was replaced by a variety of sheikhs and Sunni scholars who imposed their will on the nation while forgetting their faith. Soon these sheikhs became little more than businessmen partaking in the trades of alcohol, slavery, and usury, two of three forbidden in Islam itself. In addition, their military consisted almost entirely of slave soldiers kidnapped from Native American tribes and brainwashed into Islam, and regarding Islam, they were still faithful followers. While they may have sold pork, alcohol, and other means of sin, they did not partake in them, as that distracts them from their wealth. During the English Civil War, these factions grew more and more dangerous, completely overthrowing the Sultanate and establishing Yenistan as a republic. Once this transition began, their power soon became unbreakable, and even the mighty British were forced to bend the knee. Negotiations were held with the Ottoman Empire, turning Yenistan into a formal Turkish colony, and eventually kicking the Brits out of the land, beginning the Great European War. Far from the typical Catholic-Protestant conflict that affected the great powers of Europe in the 1600s, the 1700s was home to a much greater conflict, the fierce competition between all Catholic and Protestant nations to determine their master. One side was the London Pact, an alliance between Britain, France, and Russia in a holy war against the Golden Circle. An alliance between the Ottomans, Habsburgs, and Sweden for their goals of total European domination. Each power within the conflict sought to become the sole hegemon of their respective religions, with alliances being much more pragmatic than ideological. Still, this war was fought for 2 decades and several great battles were held, with the greatest of these conflicts being the Yenistan War, in which several British regiments had to hold the 13 colonies against the increasingly powerful Janissaries. This conflict saw much suffering, with hundreds of villagers slain by the forces of Yenistan, but it also saw some hope. In the most decisive battle, the British marched under the banner of George Washington, a heroic commander who sought to ensure that the slavers of Yenistan be punished for their treason. With this victory fought and well earned, the entire North American continent was now the land of the Pact of London. However, the war itself did not end there. Though England was victorious in the naval and colonial field, the French were failing on all fronts in the land, with the most powerful army of France failing against a group of ragtag Spanish guerrillas. After the victory of the Golden Circle on French territory, the British were soon forced to reserve their troops on the mainland. What's worse was the significance of the passage of time. For more than 50 years, the European continent knew not peace but war, and it was through the fires of war that revolutionary sentiment began to spread. That is when the French appointed Commander Napoleon Bonaparte to solve the chaos within Spain. It is said that King Louis XVI gave Napoleon only one command: gagner, win. And that he did. Napoleon's victory against Spain was astounding, but the true astonishment came from his ego. Using the dwindling popularity of the French monarchy to his advantage, Napoleon took to the streets and went on a massive gift-giving spree, earning the loyalty of his people. Upon his entry into Spain a second time, he ensured that a revolution would be rigged within France, making sure that a mob of villainous dogs would execute the monarchy and cause the death of any remaining royal ascendant. Following this, the revolution started a great purge, immediately killing royalists and destroying the good name of the new republic. In short, this plan killed the reputation of all Napoleon's rivals, giving him a clear pathway to become France's only ruler. Following the success of his plan and the chaos caused within the middle of France, he marched an army to the gates of Paris to save the state from trouble. There was no restoration, only the consolidation of his power. With France at war with the major powers of the civilized world, Napoleon's dictatorship became even more inevitable. His initial plans sought first the elimination of the New World from the field of battle, sending covert aid to various upstart Americans in their pursuit of independence from Britain and the establishment of a new republic. In short, this devolved the Great War of Europe from one between an alliance of equals to a free-for-all against France. But the worst part? France was winning the war by a long shot. In the War of the First Coalition, the French managed to conquer the lands of Italy and Spain. And through this conquest, Napoleon held a full Roman triumph in which he proclaimed himself as the rightful successor of the old nation. The War of the Second Coalition was even worse. There, all of Germany, Austria, the Ottomans, Scandinavia, and Britain tried to face off the French beasts, but they had no luck. Even the Prussians, with their powerful military and infinite support among their people, failed in their war of resistance against the French Empire. As these wars kept going on, Napoleon continually asserted himself as the one true lord of Europe, basking in the glory of his conquests and daring any upstart nation to oppose him. Through this, Napoleon turned Paris into his gigantic fortress. But the worst of his ego was not shown yet. By 1815, the entirety of Europe stood at his beck and call, from the port of Lisbon to the forests of Estonia. This was, with the exception of 4 powers: Russia, Sweden, the Ottomans, and Britain. By then, Napoleon changed his goals from defense to offense, marching into Scandinavia and Russia to secure his position in the east and further weaken his rivals. The forces of Napoleon were victorious in the campaign, eliminating even the once mighty Russians from the European field of war and ensuring Sweden's downfall by granting independence and victory to the slightly inferior country of Norway. If you know, you know. Even Britain, for as powerful as it was, could not stand to surmount Napoleon's dominance and eventually gave way to his demands within the island of Britain itself, giving full self-rule to its colonies, the Irish, and even imposing limits on the British Navy. Through this, Napoleon's reign of victory could continue, and the vision of a united Europe could be achieved. However, there was one roadblock to be found, and the King of Turkey would be its receiving end.
Sherzon lestash velzer quoil civilisatiu oniriast. France lons anchargiva. Idashwons imperot ancharge glosh aishish. So, les Europa ajud vai won ancharsen shimfil tashi rona el shimjast.
Hai donten oniri uquans victurai shingles varski karsk. Inferot, es shamans venum rosa hagiarst uquans potaliu unitiarst. Nos alloch, vius de juaj prot, les dos velza.
Ven, ishwans di les Europa vinun lenzet. Won lenzet. Irashondosh. Venus wans nisiu, chilchlans yondosh lenzet. I ajbrash, rovinci, lujalias, dash amperot. One is once the schlenzi have. Unverlashbartigast. Ron tiara penali aishish hafran. Ivoshineren. Vaidash reniav al piaro. Kunchinat Europa. Yerschvenjala Kaiser. Shavan Karasius Ishwansta.
Eniao Yutian, Charge Han, the Ven, Slavon Boyar, Snalefkarst.
Konstvilus Ajorian Ukos.
Napoleon's declaration of war upon Turkey was swift and aggressive, but more swift still was the execution of his command. Within a single day, the Grande Armée was mobilized, and Napoleon's legions held a decisive march throughout the Balkans. It took only 1 year for the entirety of Greece to be ravaged, and only 1 day for the glorious city of Constantinople to be taken. Napoleon did not stop in this conquest, as his forces pressed onwards throughout Anatolia and even into Egypt, leaving the desert fatally wounded under his command. Soon the forces of Napoleon planned on converging in Jerusalem, taking the Ottomans by surprise and leaving them with little more than a petty state within Iraq to deal with. However, Napoleon had one weakness. His troops were struck with deep attrition in the desert. They were used to facing the cold of Scandinavia and Russia, freezing themselves and huddling by a fire while hunting for wolves and other local animals for their sustenance. French supply trains were used to the winter cold to freeze goods sent to the troops, giving them less of a chance to go bad or become inevitable. They were not used to the burning conditions of the sun, forcing their uniforms to sweat, any supply of food or wood to rot quickly, or to be constantly attacked by blood-sucking mosquitoes that gave them countless diseases in the overly hot environment. Because of this, Napoleon decided to carefully retreat his troops, making sure that news of his losses wouldn't spread too far and disguising this as an effort to consolidate his already secured gains. In addition, he began a new declaration within Rome for all to hear, pronouncing himself as the emperor of all and reinstating the gods of the ancient Roman paganism throughout the continent. Not too long after, the Pope was placed under arrest and the Catholic Church fled to Klein Venedig and Brazil. The greatest celebrations, however, were the ones commemorating a new oath declared for all Catholic priests within the nation, requiring them to praise Jupiter and honor Napoleon as his successor, making the entire continent truly pagan. This led to Napoleon building the greatest army to march towards the city of Jerusalem, traveling through the hot desert as if no heat has existed before. Needless to say, Jerusalem was easily taken, but afterwards was the story of a lifetime. In the cover of night, a hidden Cossack army arrived in Jerusalem. They went without guns, only carrying swords in the thick of battle, but they were enough to turn the tide of the city. Just as the French committed themselves to the attack of Jerusalem and its elimination from the world, they could not truly hold the city. And through this, the Cossacks made way for a further brigade of elite Ottoman Christian warriors screaming a battle cry in the name of God. Yeshu, Konik, Seluk! Yeshu, Konik, Seluk! In this battle, Napoleon was found fleeing into the desert, never to be found again except by a Japanese expeditionary force hundreds of years later. However, Europe itself was drastically changed to become completely unrecognizable. The fall of Napoleon did not bring the glories of a triumphant entente, but instead a patchwork of warlords ruthlessly tearing the continent apart. It was at that time that many Europeans sought to leave, but where to? Some, of course, wanted to make it to South America, traveling vast distances to reach the continent. Others attempted a new life within the remnants of the Ottoman Empire, working to build a new Byzantium. Others still went to a far-flung land, that of Australasia, where they could build an entirely new world. The land of America was still the shining beacon of opportunity, the nation of secularism, liberalism, and progress. At least that's according to some. Others viewed it as a bustling land of religious freedom, where the Catholic Church fled to after local chaos saw it destroyed. However, just because America was powerful doesn't mean it wasn't unrivaled. The nation of Klein Venedig, a powerful juggernaut to the west, remained a front against the United States of America, with each of these nations developing contradictory identities, ideologies, and even religions. To start, let us talk about the core identities of these nations. The United States is a nation built on Protestant Christianity, its core identity created in the fires of the American Revolution and the Constitutional Convention. With this came a sentiment not only for a growing republic, but a prospering one that shall industrialize and modernize quicker than any other nation in the world. And this modernization shall be full. However, this comes with the cost of the arts, culture, and genuine emotion. Artists were driven out of jobs, forced to financially sustain themselves in factories. Priests and preachers could no longer study the Bible in peace, as those who wished to live lives solely dedicated to religion were forced to become beggars on the street to serve the needs of the needy. Even farmers, the earthbones, got replaced. The breadbasket of the world was no longer a breadbasket, but rather a dumping ground for toxic waste and disgusting chemicals. Klein Venedig, however, remained somewhat pure. Yes, they were an autocratic government that was truly elitist, but they at least remained Klein Venedig. The king of the nation, Jean III, was a noble and virtuous ruler of his people. Under his command, the nation was harsh but fair, its rules enforced by the fierce demands of justice and the will of the nation's profound commitment to God. Within Venedig, great composers adorned its tropical forests, each singing the songs of apostasy from falsehood and commitment to truth. Through these composers and artists, a further commitment was made to beauty. This commitment became one that dominated the landscape, where even the jungles of Mexico were tamed into crystalline obelisks, as they became nearly indistinguishable from the hidden forests of Narnia. The Grand Canyon, the epitaph of Klein Venedig itself, was remodeled by the greatest of architects to become a new center for Venedik's greatest palace. While both nations knew that war between the two was inevitable, neither of them knew how it was going to start. This all changed when Yusuf al-Hadad, a prominent sheikh within the remnants of Yenistan, had a spiritual awakening. Framed as a vision from Mehmet, the original founder, Yusuf al-Hadad, realized it was time for him to flee and establish his own humble abode under the mountains of Utah. This, of course, was met with skepticism from the American government, which was quick to label him as a cult leader and his followers as brainwashed zombies partaking in a retreat without clear purpose. This was despite the group's supreme irreligious nature, as neither al-Hadad nor his followers believed in any religious text, nor did they partake in any rituals. While Hadad and his followers tried to travel to the lands of Utah, they were stopped by the American government and forced to stand trial in Washington. Here is what al-Haddad said in his defense.
Kish spreekt. Weidash Schwein Unislanzi. Juden. Ods Jergelzi. Gert. Shonchish Lovaliao. Woldash Wilkastas Vosh. Usherion Vrash Iran Vilus Dedu. Ishwans Nisiu Anchaj Linit Voshkio. Or Tafehi Jelkojist. Kertun Zavotiu Connatio Verjarst Quol Yarales. Kers Sprecht. Shislan Furtra. Old lesjes wants pollerig nost. Shon shot chan shine this land venum jelkos others. Gatjara. Shorianum jelkos novios tin lestas wel zet. Shons clan venum jopetta. Ods no sanche. No shiach. Ods zonuze. Vai shot. Kukwanst ludes stan heft anchish ord. Vai jelkos. Ven ishwans dorjad zen, ishwans verdochi, anchar shine, rotum connatio verjas, for theu shine venu chi in the sun's diet. Sven Yusuf al halal, unanar kathai ronten yarajan, ishwans connatio venit de. Yarales, yarales.
At the end of the trial, the judge carefully considered his words before sending al-Haddad to the chopping block next to a cheering crowd. Some within this crowd celebrated the growth and dominance of religion over a man who sought his own relationship with God, while other members of the crowd sought to see the death of a man who prioritized religious devotion over scientific, economic, and material prosperity. However, there was only one man who mourned the death of al-Haddad. This man, whose first name was Micah, but whose last name was lost to time, rode off to the land of Klein Venedig, traveling throughout the Great Plains, Rocky Mountains, southwestern desert, and into the crystalline forests surrounding Mexico City, to alert the government of Klein Venedig of what happened to al-Halab.
Sitias unaha. Azorten er toch. Das we. Er toch das. Azorten das we. Ven Yusuf al halab. Selukraner, Ertishraner, Ongenpraner. Jondan, kot das loše salzjast, was eistjak, un gon cultuur horizons. Das hef bij een wol. Naar zort, un gon justitier, kat querta ans justitiaus. Ar sprecht venum cultraner das leski. Erzuiti das steti das act. Zor. Ven horizorai shistas steti ar aidas ortisher.
With this came a noble declaration of war against the United States by the Kingdom of Klein Venedig, swearing the destruction of the Washingtonian entity at any cost. This was a resounding and heroic message to the rest of the world, one proudly stating that wherever those who seek to worship God are attacked, Klein Venedig is a gateless wall between the attacker and the attacked, a symbol to the world that martyrdom is meaningless without true devotion to the Lord in one's heart. This attack was carried out by zealots and knights of old, armed with the latest weaponry the 1840s had to offer. Their population, while only slightly smaller than the United States, carried with them the truest of fanaticism and bravery into the conflict, armed to the teeth with words from al-Halab that remained preserved, despite America's attempts to destroy them. The first battles fought by the Knights of al-Halab were held within Texas, specifically within a small town known only as Temple. The American generals sneered at the men of Klein Venedig, with a few releasing articles condemning the irony of men who fight for a man who never claimed to be a prophet over a small town with a religious name. However, as the front grew, the forces of Klein Venedig were repeatedly victorious, kicking the Americans off the battlefield even when both outnumbered and outgunned. Soon, all of Texas fell, then all of Oklahoma. Even various farmers revolted within the Midwest, preferring independent republics, where they would be left to their own devices over the centralized command of America's industrial wasteland. However, the victories of Klein Venedig were wasted. 2 years into the war, a daring assault from the United States Navy cut off Venedig's supply throughout the Gulf of Mexico, leading to the collapse of Venedig's internal front lines. Furthermore, an additional daring assault into Mexico City by the Americans permanently damaged Venedig's attempts to fight the war. The two great tragedies, as declared by Klein Venedig's propaganda, completely destroyed the nation's morale, as a few remaining Aztecs, descended directly from those Aztec Muslims long ago, declared the final statement eliminating the reign of Klein Venedig over its own homeland, people, culture, and future. Yarales ven un uriklonzi. Today, Klein Venedig remains as a small, impoverished country in the middle of nowhere, almost entirely forgotten even by its neighbors. The nation's royal family has long since abdicated, the texts of Micah and Al-Hilab forgotten by the masses, and the people left in a general malaise. Sure, they may have their history, their kings, and their stories to tell. They may speak German, the language of art, to its highest of fruition and fluency. They may also have a deep love for everything that is good and holy and a respect of piety. However, there is no time to do good when one is stuck in a job, working terrible hours in a factory, essentially contributing nothing to society while being patted on the back by a corporate drone for supposedly doing what he hasn't. Despite America's territorial victory, they were not the main victors of the war. Instead, the winners consisted of a minority within America's population, the Sheikhs of Yenistan. The Sheikhs were previously made their wealth off of slave labor, now did so more powerfully, and they did whatever they could to secretly control various political scenes within the American government. Soon, these sheikhs gained a powerful monopoly over the American government and the ability to manipulate America's future to fit their malicious interests. By gaining this power throughout the 1850s and even into the 1860s, a monopoly was formed that could easily crush the U.S. government. Soon, abolition rose within the American government, but as the religion of Islam spread, fewer and fewer people cared about going against the Sunnah of the prophets. Of course, even figures like Harriet Tubman and John Brown tried to put a stop to it, but they were declared as radicals. While this changed when Abraham Lincoln took the presidency, it changed in a way that no one could not expect. Yenistan immediately declared independence, but instead of declaring a separate Yenistani identity, it was proclaimed as the Confederate States of America. Who was in charge of the new state? No one other than Robert Ibn Henry, one of the toughest commanders of Yenistan's armies. Unlike the more moderate commanders of Yenistan, Robert Ibn Henry did not just want the Confederate States of America to rule over the South, but a full conquest over the North as well. And guess what? He succeeded. Every move that Union forces tried to make was blockaded by traitors within their ranks. Every stand fought by Union generals was absolutely eliminated by the Confederates. Every operation bent to free slaves was stopped by the slaves themselves, cultishly believing in a religion presented them by the dark will of their slavers. In the end of the conflict, the South promised the North that as long as the South can rule, the North will remain free to do whatever it wishes within its own borders. This includes freedom of religion, freedom of trade, and even the freedom to ban slavery. This promise, of course, was completely abolished by the Confederate government upon the Union's surrender. Soon, armies of radical Islamic militias stood throughout the United States, issuing commands and orders to the American people. Taxes were forcibly paid to the American government. Random people were enslaved or held as sex slaves, and even the nation's children were held captive and brainwashed to become the new America's child soldiers. The right to keep and bear arms, of course, was formally denied, and Confederate soldiers entered Northern houses as well. What's worse, the United States of America was no more, now made into a new nation, the Turkish Caliphate, officially the successor of the now long dead Ottoman Empire. America suffered under this rule for 10 years until. The sky is black this morning. The people are filled with rage. Those politicians we believed to be upstanding Americans, good citizens of this country who respected freedom of religion given to us by the Constitution, have betrayed us. This Turkish caliphate, established by Robert Ibn Henry, is a complete shame to our nation. Rather than promising to judge our people fairly, they have applied ridiculous taxes upon our folk. My fellow Americans, do you recognize the songs that were sung in the Revolution of old? Do you recognize the speeches of our great founding fathers? We all shouted with a noble voice together, "No taxation without representation!" So, my fellow Americans, let us fight against the Saracen hordes that fought against the Spanish and their noble crusades. All know the song that made our nation great. Need I remind you of the old Battle of Lepanto, where we drove those Turks way back when? Back in those days, the heroes of Christendom all shouted for the one God that is worshipped by all of us. So, with great honor, let us shout his name. Let us fight against the Saracens for the one true God of New